Holy cow. Can you see that? Do you see Lisa? Come on over here. Do you see that? Lisa, come on over here. Do you see that? Oh my gosh, Lisa, do you see that? Oh, never mind. Hi everybody. Welcome to Beyond the Bay. The Bay Theater is sponsoring this program and doing live online discussions with live chatting Q&A available. And tonight we're talking about Rear Window. Okay, that's why I had the binoculars up. All right, today we're talking about Rear Window. And the Beyond the Bay is sponsored by the Bay Community Theater. It's a nonprofit organization based at Suttons Bay, Michigan, and we operate thebaytheater.com. And tonight with Rear Window, we have two panelists to discuss with us. First off, there is going to be Kevin Maher. Kevin is an industry insider, a professional with over 20 years of experience at various different studios, including Warner Brothers, 20th Century Fox, and Disney. He currently runs and operates the blog, the Top 10 Film List.com. Welcome, Kevin. Thank you very much for being here. And then next we have Ted Kroll. Ted Kroll is a film historian, and Ted is a film historian that taught classes at Harvard Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut, and also started a movie theater that is still running today. And he's also a member of the Bay Community Theater, as well as Kevin is today too, joining us. Well, thank you everybody for being here today. And we're getting people to get started up here. We've got a couple of people logged in. We're going to just keep on talking a little bit as we normally do, just to get started. How this works for everybody is that if you look on the right of your screen or below your screen, you're going to see that there's going to be a chat area. In that chat area, you can post comments and talk to people live. We do monitor those. We have somebody, one of our volunteers, because we're a volunteer organization, monitoring those, and that is White Fang. That's our ubiquitous person who's out there monitoring anything for us. So White Fang, thank you very much for doing that. But what White Fang will do is monitor your comments and your questions, and as we go through the program, we'll ask for questions, and White Fang will give them to us to be answered. But to get started, and to kind of let everybody get used to what's going on here, we start out with one common question to warm everybody up. Let's start with Kevin. Kevin, why is this film, Rear Window, significant enough to remain a part of film history?
Well, for me, I always put it out, I mean, as somewhat a tourist. Hitchcock is one of the seminal directors in classic Hollywood. For me, this is his best, most Hitchcockian film because it sort of combines all the elements of Hitchcock, both from a voyeuristic standpoint, the suspense element. I think it combines all the greatness of Hitchcock, the witty humor, the sort of the sexual undertones. All sort of congeal in Rear Window to make it the perfect Hitchcock film. Some could argue that others of his films are technically more brilliant, but this one I think is the perfect reflection of Hitchcock, the man, and Hitchcock, the filmmaker.
Okay. Well, thank you, Kevin. Thank you very much. And Ted, why do you think this film, Rear Window, is significant enough to remain a piece of and a part of film history?
Well, really, any film by Hitchcock has some elements to it that are really worth seeing because more than just about any other filmmaker, Hollywood filmmaker, he's not just a Hollywood filmmaker, but he tried to use the medium in different ways. and tried to captivate his audience. He enjoyed being a trickster, but underneath it all, there was some very dark things going on, and he was able to show them in this film. Okay. This film is a very experimental film too, because it takes place all on one big set, but you have like 5 or 6, 7, 8 different stories going on besides the main story. And I think that's what captivates people is sort of the experimental genius going on here of all these little stories going on tied into the main story. And what's the main story? It could be the romance between James Stewart and Grace Kelly. It could be the murder that goes across the way. It could be the whole idea of voyeurism and the ethics of that kind of thing. It's suspense, but there's a great deal of humor. It's just this combining of so many different kinds of things, and it makes it kind of like the perfect Hollywood movie too. Beautiful photography, perfect photography, different kinds of effects that are used to draw the spectator in. And I must have seen this movie around 7 or 8 times, if not more than that. And then I watched it last night, and I was just as pulled into it as I ever was. And that has to be say a lot about Hitchcock's brilliance. It's just so well made, and it's so interesting, and there's so many different things that combine together to make it such a great story. Good acting, and then there are all these interesting things to do with soundtrack and all these little stories that are so convincing across the way. Anyway, we could get going on there.
Well, actually, Ted, I'd like to expound on something that you said, because it flashes back to what we were talking about a couple weeks ago with Shadow of a Doubt in Hitchcock. Whereas in that film, he wanted to be remote and shoot everything on location for a variety of reasons, which we talked about. But I think one of the things about Hitchcock was he was always trying to do different things to not replicate himself. Because if you remember, a few years before this, he had made Rope, which was also a single set piece. But remember, on that one, he combined the camera shots, so one flowed into another as sort of a technical challenge to himself. And I think you nailed it, that this is a technical challenge for Hitchcock as well. And they actually had in the shooting script one scene that was supposed to be at Hitchcock's editor's office. Not Hitchcock, I'm sorry, Jimmy Stewart's character, at Jeff's, his editor's office. And they actually shot the film, they shot the scene, and one of the production designers said, that really doesn't work in the context of this film, because it should be a one set film, self-contained. And they actually used the dialogue from that scene when Jeff is talking to his editor on the phone. And they just lifted that out from that shot scene and used it strictly on the phone to self-contain it. Because you're right, he was experimenting with how far he could push film and film realism by, constricting himself as he does brilliantly in this one.
And there's Lifeboat too, which is
exactly
another one of the movies from the 40s where everything takes place in a lifeboat. But this is so much more than that, because well, we can talk about it, but I mean, there's this romance going on, and there's this problem of James Stewart Jeff trying to keep his independence, and he's feeling restricted by Grace Kelly's. And then you can look at all the little dramas that are going across the way as kind of a reflection of what's going on in that relationship. That's one way to look at this thing. So,
well, it is. It's whereas Lifeboat and Rope were two-dimensional films, right? Because there's literally nothing happened outside of the apartment in Rope and the boat in Lifeboat. But here there's a three-dimensionality because of those additional stories that are drawn in as certainly secondary but important pieces, right? Each one gives a different nuance to the story itself, and that gives it its three-dimensionality, and it sort of takes you out of this one room, one location, one set thinking, right? Because it does feel like you're moving around.
Well, not only that, in the soundtrack, there's always kids playing. I mean, it's constantly a lot of things going on. There's the kids playing, and there's that little scene in the corner there where they go out to the street, and there's always cars going by there.
Right.
That way, but then there's the music too, which they got a piano player who's composing a piece, and somebody has a radio on, and all this kind of thing. So, in one sense, there's no music like we're used to film music, but in another sense, there's all this music that's being played all the time throughout the movie, and sometimes it reflects what like good film music does, reflects what's going on in the drama itself.
Well, it's interesting because this movie actually has a credited composer, Franz Waxman, who was a preeminent composer in 50s Hollywood, who had sort of he was one of the people who brought jazz influence into scores of music. And that's obviously his main thrust is the music over the credits, right? That's a pure jazz soundtrack. But all of the music that's played in the background was taken from the Paramount songbook, as it were. So all the songs were, Paramount owned the rights to them, and they had to choose from this list of Paramount songs. You know, like That's Amore, and they're very popular songs, but Paramount's musical arm owned the rights to them, so it didn't cost them anything to use them. So while Hitchcock and Waxman and others, I'm sure, utilized them to add nuances to the film itself, they were selected from a very specific songbook.
Well, I think that's interesting because at the time making movies in Hollywood, they wanted music and they wanted to publish the music and they wanted to make it seem like somebody was writing everything. But as Ted and you've both talked about, is the sound was all part of the movie, the sounds of the street and sounds what's going on in the background in all their lives. And I think that's really important. And I'm not going to try to interrupt. You guys are talking really good, but we had some technical difficulties. We want to let everybody know we think we've solved it. Somehow the chat session was not appearing. Some changes have been made in the background, all the magic that goes on. And it seems like we've had it working, but some of you, if you logged in really early, you may have to just log out really quickly and log back in, and you should be able to get it all back up because we would like to have your comments. All right. But otherwise, thank you guys. It's been going very good so far and a lot of good comments on that. But let's start with our first question, White Fang, that we have for you guys, because you guys are kind of hitting on this stuff and we want to get everybody involved here. The first question is, the story bounces the audience between believing and doubting Jeff and what we see as ourselves. I mean, Jeff, Lisa, and Stella together, and what's going on. At the end of the movie, though, do we know for sure that Thorwald killed his wife? Let's start with you, Kevin. What do you think?
Well, we do, first because he apparently confessed, but also because Stella recounts the fact that her head was buried underneath the plant, but was then removed and placed in a hat box. And that we talked about this when we did Shadow of a Doubt before. That Hitchcock loved old famous murders, and he was a student of them, and he sort of borrowed that from a killer in England who had killed his pregnant girlfriend, I believe, dismembered her body, and essentially flung the body parts all over town. But he didn't know what to do with the head, and that was ultimately his undoing. So it's sort of a parallel to what was somewhat Thorwald's undoing, was that the head was discovered in a hat box in the apartment. So, yeah. Oh, and I'm sorry, the other part of the question, and then Ted, I'll let you talk on it. The only scene that we take away from Jeff's point of view is when he's sleeping and Thorwald leaves with a woman dressed in black. And that too is taken from a famous murder in England where a guy killed his wife, stuffed her in a trunk, and then dressed his mistress up as a sailor and sailed for America. And it was eventually caught in America when he got to America, realizing that that wasn't his wife that he was sailing with. And so Hitchcock sort of wove that in as well. But I think that's, for me anyway, and Ted, you can argue this point, if that's the MacGuffin, is that woman walking out of the apartment with Thorwald that Jeff doesn't see. Because for the viewer, for us sitting watching this movie, that's the only thing that we know that Jeff doesn't know. And it does sow all the doubt into whether he did it or didn't do it. So,
Ted,
that's how I'd answer
any
that.
follow up on that?
Well, when you look back on it and you realize that Anna is up in, what is it, Merritt, something like that, Merritt, Connecticut, I guess. Then you realize that there was a girlfriend, and he does make these long distance calls and that kind of thing. Well, at any rate, you're right. It does throw some question into the whole thing. But again, you're right. It's like Hitchcock likes to misdirect the audience. But for the most part, I think you're rooting with Jeff about discovering this thing. And the other thing is, and it's not really made clear, but the actual murder itself, or the supposed murder, there's like a bottle breaks or a glass breaks, and there's a short scream, and then bang, it goes dark. So that's another thing that there are all these little things that just keep popping up in the movie that I don't think if you watch it one time, you're not going to really pick up on, but it's in your brain somewhere, and that's what Hitchcock's trying to do. And of course, huge thing that Hitchcock's trying to do is to get you into Jeff's head, and that means you see what he sees, and then you see his expression on his face, and so in your mind as the viewer, you get a sense of some sort of emotional connection there with Jeff, that you're caught up into the same kinds of feelings and thinking that he goes on, and that's a huge thing that Hitchcock does throughout his film, is to draw you in as the viewer, to be connected to the protagonist of the film. It's really a Hollywood thing, but Hitchcock really uses it to manipulate the viewer. So
yeah. And I think that's part of it too, is it's just like the old telephone thing. You talk to one person, you tell them one thing, another person believes this, and everything else in the story gets believed. And we all see this differently. We all pick up on different things. And when you leave at the end, everybody going into that last seat until actually Thornwald walks in and actually starts doing something, we think it could be just a hoax, and that Jeff is being dangled, who knows what's happening. And everybody has a sense of belief of what's going on before you get to there. And I think, as you guys are pointing out, it's like, okay, this is all Hitchcock. And so what they're doing is really trying to drive you to buy more tickets to come see the theater again, to watch it over and over again. So no, I think it's a masterful piece of assembling this to keep.
Speaking of that last scene where Thornwald walks into the apartment, he becomes the sympathetic character for a little bit. Why are you doing this to me?
Right.
What is it? And then there's this incredible shot of Stuart just sitting in the dark, and not answering him. It's really creepy, the way he's sort of like this ghost, antagonizing Raymond Burr, the Thorwald character, and
and if you think about it, some people may think that Thornwald was thinking, oh, he saw me kill the dog, and that's the whole thing. So I think this is all about the dog. He could have been innocent. He could not have killed him. There's so many questions that go back on this.
Yeah, and the other thing is, like, his wife was pretty awful to him too. I mean, there's no reason to kill anybody for sure, but he was not a very sympathetic.
So, anyways, we don't know the whole story of Thornwald. We don't know the whole story of what happened and actually what happened. But that's the fun of going to the movies and being able to somebody give you this and make your own judgments and keep you going. And this is just a great instance. Any more guys on this topic? Because I think this is a good time, but we're getting some questions posted. We'd like to get moving on. Anything else? Okay, good.
It'll come up. Okay.
Yeah. All right. So White Fang, we have a question from White Fang here. From Ted. Hi, Ted. Haven't seen you in a while. Hope everything's well. Watching again today, notice the parallels between Lisa and Miss Lonely Hearts. Both trying for love, green dresses, simultaneously in grave danger. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I'd agree. It's like all these little characters across the way. Somebody's actually compared the shape of the windows in across the way as being little movie screens. So you're watching these little movies going on across the way. But I think in every case, the little dramas are a reflection of something that's really going on in the main. Between Lisa and Jeff. I didn't see this Lonely Hearts. Lisa's pretty self-assured, but I guess underneath all of that, there is some insecurities going on there. This last time I watched her, I was realizing how kind of immature she is in a way, even though she's got all these sophisticated ways about her. But why does she keep throwing herself at Stewart? I'm not quite sure what his attraction is. Maybe only because he's a father figure. I don't know. You could go on and on about these.
She's in love, so
yeah. I guess so. But he really discourages her at times and is pretty mean to her, actually. And that's his own selfishness. And while we're speaking of that, I was aware this time too. Whenever Jeff encounters her and talks to her, as soon as they stop their conversation, rather than thinking about what is going on there, he always goes across them and starts looking across the way. And it's this way of deflecting and keeping himself from really paying attention to what really is happening in front of him,
Mm-hmm.
I love this question because I think it is, we're looking at, the film is fundamentally about voyeurism, right, which I talked about in the introduction. And it's sort of like Lisa is watching elements of her life unfold with Miss Lonely Hearts, right? There's the parallel that Ted notes with the color of dresses, right? Lisa wears the pale green dress that's shown here, as Miss Lonely Hearts wears the pale green dress, but then she wears an emerald green dress when she's going to go out. Now, as he also said in the question, they're both put in mortal danger because of their willingness to go out into the world, right? Miss Lonely Hearts to the bar, Lisa over to Thorwald's apartment, but it's their moving out of their, I don't want to say comfort zone, but out of themselves to go somewhere else to put themselves in danger. And there is a sense of Lisa watching what she's going through with Jeff. Jeff keeps rebuffing her. He feigns disinterest, and Ted's right. Every time she tries to get intimate, he turns it back to either the murder or to watching his neighbors. And his cast reflects his impotency, right? And his camera is, of course, a phallic device that he then uses out toward, and this is like, casting out. But everyone is watching someone, just as we're sitting in the dark watching the movie unfold in front of us. So the parallel between Lisa and Miss Lonely Hearts is keen. So thanks, Ted, for drawing that out, because it is she's watching her life and her potential, her life in the future, but then also little bits of what's going on in her life in real time. So
and then there's that thing I just realized, Lisa brings in this dinner, and there's Miss Lonely Hearts who pantomimes a dinner too,
Yep.
with a lover. So
Yeah.
I mean, there's another action that they kind of echo each other.
For sure.
Mm-hmm. Oh, good. All right. Any other questions? Jeff is in a cast trapping him in his apartment, but is he always trapped by who he is? Kevin?
Well, I mean, he's clearly a selfish individualist, right? I mean, that's evident by his pushing Lisa away, his, you know, I mean, I mentioned last thing that the camera is a phallus, but it's also a barrier. You put the camera between yourself and what's in life. And I think that's how he's built this sort of shelter, this self-contained shelter of one, that removes him from life. So he is trapped, and it's only Lisa and her willingness to risk her life for love, essentially, that draws him out from behind the camera. I mean, look, he even uses the flash to fend off Thorwald. Again, using the camera to put himself between anything of life or of danger or anything. So I mean, the first camera that how he broke his leg was shattered. So in a sense, that got between him and at least death, not injury, but it got him between something. So yeah, I think he is trapped to who he is.
Ted?
Well, and he doesn't. Well, he seems insecure too. I mean, he doesn't want to be pulled out of this thing. He seems to be fearful of he's scared of what Lisa presents to him, that intimacy and them getting close. I mean, he's perfect. He's totally unwilling to change his style of living to accommodate hers, even though he realizes that she's very accomplished in her world, just like he was totally accomplished in his world. And then there's that whole thing of him being in a cast, and there's all this sexual banter going on, but he's not in a position ever to act out sexually, actually, in the movie. I mean, and it's clear that he's completely up through his hip. He's got a cast on, and I'm not going to go too farther into that, but there is a sense that he's impotent, and that might be a fear too. So you can carry that too far, I suppose, but really it's there. I mean, she's smooching with him all the time, and in some ways he can't reciprocate it because he's unable to.
Well, and I mean, and we can move on to the next question, but carry that out to the fact that, or you can suppose that Jeff is also an image of Hitchcock, right? Whose love and lust for Grace Kelly was very evident in in all of his machinations, but he too was trapped behind a camera and ultimately impotent where it came to his leading ladies that he loved. So like you said, Ted, you can keep peeling back this onion of what all this means, but the fact is that that Jeff does represent Hitchcock in a sense of being behind a camera and then capturing what's in front of him, whether it's murder or other nefarious things or a honeymoon. So.
And with the torso, it seems that Jeff gets a great deal of titillation from her, but it's from watching her. And there he's got this woman,
yes.
this gorgeous woman all over him, and he can't handle it.
Right.
And the whole movie has all this sexual undercurrent going through the whole thing. I mean, and the close-ups of, that close-up of Grace Kelly at the very beginning when he comes, at first there's a shadow. There's a shadow over him, and then there's this incredible, beautiful close-up of her, and he's put off by it. He doesn't.
Right.
He doesn't embrace it. He's scared of it in a way, And I guess, go ahead.
That's what I was going to say, that because there's Rita and Ted are talking about this too, is it's because Rita's saying Jeff expects Lisa to do all the changing so his life can remain the same. And I also see Ted is saying he's in a trap of his own making. His thirst for danger and carelessness about his impact. So it's this whole movie shows everybody, and are they doing? Why are they doing it? And the audience sits there and gets to look at all this and be the true voyeur of what's going on.
Yeah.
So do we have another question there, Sherry? Another one from Ted. Thank you. Can you talk about Hitchcock's beef with David O. Selznick? I see Kevin already laughing. Supposedly Hitch dressed and coached Raymond Burr. Oh, I like this. Supposedly Hitch dressed and coached Raymond Burr to resemble Selznick.
Yeah.
So what's your thoughts?
He gave Raymond Burr the curly hair, gave him the little glasses that Selznick wore, and also gave that he smoked a lot. And the beef essentially began when Selznick brought Hitchcock over to the U.S. to make Rebecca, and nitpicked Hitchcock to death on that film. And there's a couple books about their relationship, but one of the general books about Selznick is, I think it's called A Memo from David Selznick, and he was famous for writing book-length memos that would arrive at all hours of day and night. And of course, Hitchcock being, a I don't want to call him an auteur, but a singularly driven person while making a film, he did not like Selznick looking over his shoulder. And actually, they only made 3 movies together in the 7-year relationship. And Selznick farmed him out for his best work, like Notorious and Foreign Correspondent, that made during the Selznick period, but not with Selznick overseeing them. So the beef was that Selznick was crazy in the attention to detail that he obsessed over when his films were in pre-production, production, and then post-production. And Hitchcock actually used that to get away with some stuff on Notorious while Selznick was off doing something else. So it was a well-worn beef.
But you could characterize Selznick as a producer. I mean, and he's the one that's putting the money up, and he's the one who is trying to make sure that the audience is satisfied. And Hitchcock is in certainly a different place of wanting to make a really good films and use all the devices available to a filmmaker to explore that way and get to the audience. So it's sort of like the two of them were at odds simply because of what their roles were. One was a creative. I guess you could say Selznick was creative in his way, but in a producer way of producing a product. Whereas I don't know if Hitchcock always thought he was making art, but he was pretty much involved with artists and creative, playwrights and composers. I mean, he had a pretty refined sensibility. So that's another.
Yeah, I mean, I would think it's because I agree with that. I think Selznick was a frustrated director, and he wanted to control everything. I mean, the stories of Gone with the Wind and his, meticulous, harping on details for that film. The end result with Selznick was generally pretty good, but the getting there was miserable for all involved. And I would argue that Rebecca, the only film Hitchcock made to win Best Picture was Rebecca, and I would argue that that's more of a Selznick film than a Hitchcock film. And of course, people can argue the opposite, but I will believe till the day I die that that's more Selznick's movie than Hitchcock's, and I think that was the root of the beef. But yeah, it was long-standing for sure.
Okay, well, good. That's a lot because I could just see Selznick sitting in the dark, off camera, or in doing the dailies or whatever, with his big cigar and the red glow coming from it. Just you could see him in this dark like that. I could just see that be a Selznick type of role. So.
Hitchcock would shut down his set if Selznick showed up. He would either send him home, or he'd have him do something that had nothing to do with making the film.
Well, then that's yeah.
He wanted nothing to do with David Selznick except for the money that Selznick provided him.
Oh, that's good. All right, White Fang, do we have another question? Every character has clothes that tell their own story. Who was the costume designer for the film?
Edith Head.
Edith Head, yes. Can you tell us more?
But it seems like she was constantly doing everybody's movie all the time. Was she was Paramount? Is that the case?
Yeah,
Uh,
for 43 years, I think she was there.
Yep.
I
And
don't know if you've ever seen the movie The Incredibles, that animated
yes.
movie.
Yeah.
Edith Head is caricatured, and that is one of the characters in the animated movie.
So I
The
understand that
Incredibles.
she holds the most. She's the most awarded, Academy awarded costume designer. She was nominated like 43 times, won 8 times, and she just was being picked up by everybody during this time period because it was just, these went on for extensive. I'm going to show you another slide here that I think is interesting. I found doing research. There was actually a Grace Kelly Rear Window Barbie based upon the movie and the set and the designs, and that's how popular this was. And somebody else was talking to me. I haven't seen the person online or anything else. Somebody else was talking to me recently about how Edith Head was really important in this movie too. And is that if another characterization of this is that how much important it was for Grace Kelly to have her clothing. She packs all this stuff into that little attaché case, and when she clips what happens when she clips the opener latch? It just kind of poofs open. In all her negligees that you see, and when she's later, I think that's just there's so much to be said with all that. And she was well known. Edith Head was well known in the costumes in this play out for everybody, and especially for Grace Kelly. So,
Well,
Yeah,
I'm going to
she
be a little off color here and say that that little purse has been seen as a sexual symbol too.
okay.
Yeah, well, Hitchcock used Edith Head pretty much for most all of his films. Even before he came to Paramount, he was using her for some of his films, and he was always very meticulous about what his women wore, and that became more and more evident after Grace Kelly left, especially specifically with Vertigo and with both of Tippi Hedren's movies. They became very sort of hyper um, intense on how he dressed them, what colors they wore, when they wore them. Um, if you that slide before with the peignoir set, for instance, um, Grace Kelly wore it to the set, and Hitchcock was initially disappointed with how it looked because it didn't have enough cleavage. So Hitchcock pulled Edith Head aside and said, "Could you go take it back, put in falsies, and refit it, and then we'll shoot the scene." So Grace Kelly and Edith Head went back. Grace Kelly didn't know at the time, but she had done enough modeling to quickly realize what Edith Head was tasked with doing when they were starting to work on the peignoir. And Grace Kelly didn't really want that. So instead, you can see the picture in the thing. They use some tricks of the trade, and they added no falsies. They came back out, and Hitch said to Grace Kelly, "Now see, doesn't it look better with those on?" And they hadn't done anything artificial to Grace Kelly for that scene, but her and Edith Head had a little fun with Hitch's fascination with cleavage. So Edith Head could do anything with a needle and thread.
Yes.
Just as a sideline here, speaking of Edith Head as somebody that worked with Hitchcock a lot, and we talked about what a string of movies that Hitchcock had following this, and you have to say that he was beginning to get his crew together. I'm not sure if this is the first movie that Robert Boyle, the filmmaker, who's the cinematographer? It's Robert Boyle.
Let's see. It's yeah, it is Boyle. Boyle is
Yeah.
the
Boyle.
Okay,
cinematographer.
I don't know if he's been on any earlier movies of Hitchcock, but he stayed along through this through all the great Hitchcock films, except for Psycho. And then the editor is the same, the set designers. So what you're seeing here is something that's pretty extraordinary, of where Hitchcock is developing this creative team, and they all agree on things, and they're all working together. And he's this real ringmaster of getting. if nothing else with Hitchcock, I mean, you can throw everything else away, and I won't ever, but his ability to make just incredibly wonderful films. I mean, the filmmaking and the exactitude and and all the different elements. It's just in his films just make them so fascinating to watch all the time.
So,
It's always in the right place. The colors, the rhythms, the editing, everything like that. And certainly he had his hand in all that, but he had all these amazing craftsmen around him. I mean, just think of that set. I mean, that and how, like you mentioned in the introduction, some of the they actually had running water in this thing,
Mm-hmm.
and some of the little apartments and everything like that. It's just there's really nothing like it in Hollywood where somebody paid that much attention to every detail of what was on the screen.
Well,
yeah,
someone had asked, I think in the comments, I think I saw it was, did Hitchcock ever shoot an alternate ending? And after
yeah.
they edited this complete film, all of the ends of what they had left of what Hitchcock had shot, they stitched it all together and it made one reel. So that's what, about 12 or 14 minutes of extra footage that they shot, that they printed. Obviously, they did takes and they didn't print them, but of what they printed, there was about 12 to 14 minutes of extra footage. So that, to your point, Ted, that speaks to the exactitude of what was going on when they were shooting this film, and that encompasses everybody, right? That's the production designer, that's the editor, that's the cinematographer, that's the script writer. Everything is tight and controlled, and then Hitchcock goes out and executes it with his team and his actors, and that's a testament to his artistry for sure.
So this goes along what I want to just comment on, wrap this up a little bit, is that Hitchcock was an artist, and I think he saw this all as art. And the way he can draw his landscape is with all these other artists and to gather them together and let them do what they do best. And I think like his hands and everything are to the point where, but he's still allowing them to get the best, to do the best they can, and to piece it together and let them do it. The actors, the set, the costume, the music, the everything. Okay. And I don't know if you guys agree with that, but to me, that's what Hitchcock does. And allowing Edith Head to do all her work and to get such notoriety in these films that are about murder, and they have these gorgeous outfits and everything else, and it just sets the tone for this quality.
Well, he was an artist, but he was also disparaging, because if he heard us talking about the impotency and the voyeurism and all this, he would also say, and I wish I could do a Hitchcock voice, but I can't, so I won't. It's only a movie.
Yeah.
Because so he was very self-deprecating in that respect, but he was very proud of what he did. And yes, of course, he was
and he had a lot
artist.
There was a story that I was reading about that, or I heard, I guess, was that, they saw the set and they said, there's no sound stage that's big enough for this thing. And they said, well, there's this one set, and if we tear out the floor, we'll have enough room.
Right.
The says, they'll never let me do it. And then somebody said, but they'll let Hitchcock do it.
Yeah.
Did.
Well, good. All right. Well, thank you very much. And
one thing before we run out. If you made it today, it never would have happened, because you would have had air conditioning. You would have had people lock their doors. There would have been cell phones. It's sort of also a testament of what was going on at the time, a time in American history when there wasn't any air conditioning. So when it was 90 degrees, people did sleep out on their. I can even remember that, would sleep outside on their grades. And I was shocked that everybody just walks into Jeff's apartment. They don't even knock.
Right.
And the thing is, there's a comment from somebody already in the,
because there wasn't any lock on it, so.
So there's a comment from Ted, I think, in the comment sections about comparing this movie about how social media is what this movie. We do all this now with social media. You can go find somebody's Facebook account and see what they're doing, okay, or what's up with them, and you can find out their addresses. You can do all kinds of stuff about people today. But you make a good point, Ted. Could we do it with a movie where there's people lock their doors? I thought that was just hilarious. Nobody locks their doors in all these movies. I'm like, are you kidding me? So
wait, Thorwald locked his door because Lisa had to climb in the window.
That's
but
true.
He's the only one, and of course he's the killer.
He's the killer.
That should have released any doubt at that point when he's the only one who locks his door. So there you go.
You also
All right.
know, last time I talked about the back staircase.
Yeah.
And here we have the rear window, and it is a sense of being able to, and then there's some place in there where there are these things. Who says it? The detective saying, well, there are things that happen that you just can't know, that are dark, things like that. Mm-hmm. And that's what this movie's about, is that you are looking into people's private lives that you wouldn't ordinarily have an opportunity to see, or certainly things that people would not share with other people. And he's sticking his nose into it, and he almost dies for it too.
Mm-hmm. All right. So from Ted again here, I read that Hitch had some sympathy for Thorwald, just someone minding their own business, murder, until a neighbor starts invading his privacy. And that's, you could say it all, because there's questions. It leaves you with questions whether what he was really guilty of, and all the things that went on. But as Kevin said this week, and he also said last time with Shadow of a Doubt, it's just the movie. It doesn't really matter.
Well, I mean, it is true, though. Hitchcock does set up empathy for his murderers. I mean, look at Psycho is the greatest example. By the end of the movie, you feel for Tony Perkins or Norman Bates. You feel for him, right? And he's a cold-blooded psychopath. So Hitchcock consistently does this in his films by setting up sympathy for the villain. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think it's spot on. Of course, we start to feel sorry for Thorwald, that he is being picked on by Jeff and his crew. So yeah.
So do we have another question there, White Fang?
Jeff is not always the nicest guy in the world either. I mean, he's pretty nasty to Lisa at times,
Yeah.
And it's only because it's James Stewart that you give him a pass,
Right.
So how close was the screenplay to the short story it was based on? How much influence did Hitchcock have on the script? Anybody any knowledge of that?
There's an interview with a screenwriter, and it's an interesting, and it's with the movie that I had on the DVD. And apparently the screenwriter, Hayes, I think is his name, was he wrote Sam Spade stories for the radio. And Hitchcock and him got together and had a drunken dinner together, and didn't talk about the movie at all. And they really got along. The interesting thing was that apparently Hayes was in the Army, and the only movie, he was a projectionist, and the only movie he had was Shadow of the Doubt. So he showed it 3 times a day for 30 days. And so their discussion over dinner was Shadow of the Doubt. Anyway, apparently the Hitchcock sent over the story, so told him to write a treatment. Hayes wrote a treatment. They submitted to the studio. The studio said, go ahead. And then he wrote a second treatment, and Hitchcock was not involved in any of this. And then at this point, Hitchcock got in, and according to this interview, what Hitchcock, they broke it down into shots, and they made the whole movie in the screenplay. And he also mentioned that Hitchcock was so much involved in the little sub dramas that were going on. That was his great contribution, because in the story there wasn't any Lisa, there wasn't any romance. I don't think there was, and there wasn't any of that stuff going on in the courtyard. It was pretty much a straight. A guy saw a murder across the way, and it just got expanded. And then they said that part of the reason they added all those things was to keep the viewer's interest, because if it was just a straight murder story, people would start dozing off like that. And of course, really for me, that's the whole movie, is all this other stuff and how it all weaves together, and complements the love story and the murder story and all that. So
Yeah, in the book, the character isn't a photographer. I think he's a writer, maybe. And Hitchcock sort of shifted it to sort of loosely based on Robert Capa and Ingrid Bergman, who had had a brief but heated affair while Bergman was shooting Notorious for Hitchcock. And Capa did have an injury from shooting at some war location or something. So he sort of spun that memory from Notorious and sort of layered that on with his job. And then obviously made Lisa a model who didn't exist in the short story versus an actress with Bergman. But yeah, Ted did get it right. Hitchcock did, he and what's his name? John Michael Hayes is his name. And he went on to write To Catch a Thief, The Trouble with Harry, and The Man Who Knew Too Much, pretty much in succession after this one with Hitchcock. So I believe he wrote the most screenplays of any screenwriter that Hitchcock worked with. And it was because they had that great working relationship where he could get Hayes to write as with each shot. So they'd build it from the shot up and then have the dialogue sort of peppered through. But it was all, again, like I said in the introduction, taking the movie in Hitchcock's brain and putting it on paper and then on storyboards. And that's the melding that he would then go shoot.
Okay. Yeah. That's good. All right. So Ted says each apartment displays different elements of love, sex, loneliness, conflict, boredom, companionships. What do you guys have to say about that? Is it
the one we haven't talked about is the composer, the songwriter.
Yeah. So
that's this interesting thing that goes through the movie with his frustrations and getting people to pay attention to him. And I haven't done analysis of it, but the gradual development of the story of the song that he writes. So it's sort of the creative process that is shown there. I mean, not only so that's really the one of the more interesting things that goes on in the movie. And of course, there's that bit where it's a little corny maybe, but the woman Miss Lonely Hearts is delivered from suicide when this melody goes into her head. She hears this melody. That's one of the subplots in that. I mean, there's almost a whole movie in that, and it's just sort of a throwaway. And then there's these other scenes. There's my favorite joke in the whole thing is when Miss Torso's boyfriend comes in and he's sort of like little guy. Hey, he needs something to eat, and she's like, so.
Well, if you want to be cynical, it's the arc of a relationship or an arc of a marriage, right? You have all the way from, loneliness, companionship, lust, sex, and then murder, right? So Hitchcock, every good relationship's going to end with murder. So Ted is right. It does sort of arc through all the different stages of a relationship or of being, but I would say more so of relationships in different phases of them. And then, of course, punctuated with Thorwald finally killing his wife. So,
and another thing about
Hitchcock.
So the actor.
This is all done in this. The world goes on around. This is inside the world, and you can hear the world outside it all. It's going on, the noises and the traffic on the outside and all that. So it's sort of this own little inner world which is also shown to be in the larger world too.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things too is that the actor that plays the composer, Ted, because you brought that up, is actually a composer, and at the time was a songwriter. And do you remember the Witch Doctor song? Not the Hitch Doctor, the Witch Doctor song in the 50s? He wrote that. He was an ASCAP writer, wrote a lot of famous songs that were popular and everything else. And he was an actual composer. He acted in this film as a composer and played the piano, just being part of it. And that was his life because he was an actual composer. And also, I like this shot because it's the only one I have of the composer. And do you see anybody else in the shot?
Yeah.
It's Hitchcock. So if everybody's looking for Hitchcock, that's where he was really slowly. Where's Hitchcock in this film? He's right there. So.
Yeah, I'm going to throw the composer's name out there because I wrote it down. It's Ross Bagdasarian. And he, even more so from the Witch Doctor song, he also created Alvin and the Chipmunks.
Right.
So for better or for worse, he's also responsible for that.
Yes. All right. Well, good. Do we have another question out there, White Fang? We're running close to time here.
Beat me to it.
50% of the film was focused on what was happening outside of Jeff's apartment. Is this film about Jeff or about life in the city?
Both.
Both. Kevin?
It's all about watching. What we're doing in a darkened theater is the same thing Jeff's doing. It's all about voyeurism. You can go to the small to the broad, but it's all about watching. We're reminded that we're watching, but it never takes us out of the film. But it's Hitchcock's way of just constantly reminding us, you're watching, you're watching. So,
Well, and it's a mixed thing. I mean, it's not all a bad thing. It's not all a good thing. I mean, he does catch the murderer because of that too, you know.
mm-hmm.
And they were going to call up the woman who was going to kill herself. They were in the process of calling up the police to stop her, and then they get interrupted and that kind of thing. So,
right.
Then there's that speech. There's that speech when the dog is killed, and the woman says, "You know, what are neighbors for?" You know, that I mean, that's probably in Hitchcock. That's the one, you know, declaring statement about, you know, trying to be supportive of each other as neighbors and that kind of thing. You usually don't get that kind of straightforward declaration of something like that in a Hitchcock film, you know. Well, I guess in Lifeboat there's some of that. They're against the Nazis in that, but.
All right, we've got time for one more question. The last question, please, White Fang. The last question we have. Last question, please. Last question is, how does this movie compare with Vertigo? We've talked about Hitchcock and we've talked about different movies. And when you look at this film and everything else, how does this compare to Vertigo? Just, we've got about a minute or two left to do that.
Let me throw two things out. There's one, both of them have James Stewart hanging by his hands. and one time he falls and the other time you're not quite sure how he gets out of it. But both the time he's suspended over a period. And somebody else has made the point that when Vertigo begins, after the introduction, it's in an apartment that's very much looks like the apartment in Rear Window, with the same kinds of blinds, the same kind of window, and he's in there with a different kind of woman, a different relationship with a woman, but it's also a discussion about relationships and that kind of thing. And he's also in Vertigo, the beginning of Vertigo, he's getting out of his corset, as he puts it.
Yes.
Whereas in Rear Window, he's got that cast on. So
right.
It is a kind of interesting link there. But Rear Window is realism.
Yes.
It's as good as Hollywood can make realism, whereas Vertigo is sort of a fever dream and fantasy kind of thing. So take it from there.
So, Kevin, we got a couple seconds left here. Any further on that?
I think that it's very, it's not by accident that James Stewart plays both characters, because as I said in the introduction, he most accurately reflected Hitchcock's psychological and emotional beliefs. Cary Grant was who Hitchcock wanted to be. Jimmy Stewart's characters in these two films are who Hitchcock really was.
Well, good. And we're running out of time today. We want to thank everybody for being here today. Just the last couple things to say with you is that we'd like everybody, if you can, please subscribe to the Bay Theater's YouTube channel. You can hit the subscribe button, and if you're logged in with your Gmail account or whatever, it'll get you logged in. This will help us to do more things with YouTube and provide you with more things. So we appreciate if you get, because you can get also notices, announcements every time, notifications every time we post something. So please take some time to subscribe there. Also coming up we'll be back here in 2 weeks. We've got two movies for December. The first one in 2 weeks is going to be A Christmas Story. The Bay Theater is closed at this time because of the situation, the health situation. So stay safe, stay home, and watch the film at your choice. But if not, you've probably seen this already 100 times. So come on and join the fun and join the discussion on Tuesday, December 8th. That's 2 weeks from now. 2 weeks from now. And then 2 weeks from then, or 4 weeks from today, is going to be just before Christmas, live online discussion about It's a Wonderful Life. And we've also seen that one. It's one of the favorite movies. And we're looking all forward to talking about this with all of you and sharing that. And between now and then for this weekend, we want to say happy Thanksgiving to everybody. Thank you very much for today for participating. It's good to see some people back and joining us today. Stay safe and socially be social responsibility. I can't even get that saying out of my mouth, but be safe. Thank you very much. Enjoy yourself, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you.